Great. I have a series of questions for Mr. Penway, so hopefully he won't sit down, because I heard himself getting up each time. Mr. Penway, we recently had a delegation from the BC Assessment Tax Authority attend at the request of Mr. Bell's motion to opine on the effects on taxation. The delegation brought with it a private developer consultant, and I've been given to understand that that developer consultant was retained by the city to attend. Is that correct?
So just to clarify, council's had a few questions come up about taxation and the effects of taxation on different policy matters. And so we wanted to get some clarity around that, and some of it related to this topic, but some related to other topics that the Assessment Authority gets into. The Assessment Authority is basically an organization that looks at what property values are selling for, and then based upon that, they assess all of our lands and apply an assessed value. They're not in the business of looking forward and saying, if you make this change, it will have that effect on property values. That's something that a profession called a property appraiser would do. And so the Director of Finance arranged for the Assessment Authority to come to speak to council. And with that also brought Paul Sullivan, who's a professional property appraiser, to give opinions as well. And people have been concerned about the potential, and you're one of the ones that's raised concerns about the potential. Will this change push up property values and therefore taxation and drive housing prices up and taxation up? And that's not something we expected to have happen, but we're not professional appraisers and we don't set the assessment authority. So we went and talked to the assessment authority and got their indication of it. The Director of Finance was having them come to council as well. And Paul Sullivan came to speak to council. And we've actually invited him here tonight in case there are specific questions about the effect of appraisal on this. And so he can answer some questions tonight if need be. But the intention is to get some clarity around, what are the effects of this? And for the most part, what we're seeing is that your value in terms of the land, and maybe it's best for someone like Sullivan, but so that's the answer in terms of, so we had both the Assessment Authority and Paul Sullivan attend.
Let's hear from Kerry, because you probably have some specific questions.
The question was, Mr. Sullivan opined in respect of a whole series of properties in Vancouver City. You've highlighted the fact that we've got some 30, I only actually counted 27, but using your number 30, coach houses in North Vancouver City. Why didn't you ask him to opine on the data in relation to North Vancouver City homes as opposed to picking homes in Vancouver, which are not really relevant because of the difference in FSR that applies to the coach houses in the city? Thank you.
And I think I'll ask Paul to respond to this and impart the answers while he's coming up, that what he wanted to do is to have some hard information about actual sales.
Yeah, the difficulty was we wanted to do a paired sales analysis of homes which are selling without laneway houses, without suites, with laneway houses and suites. So as we learned tonight, Vancouver is the only jurisdiction that allows that. So we had to go there to study those inputs and see whether they had an impact on land value. A second thing analysis we did was to study the 30 lane or coach houses that have been approved in North Vancouver, and what we found is none of them have sold. So therefore I wouldn't be able to provide any analysis from the lack of transactions. So that's why we went to Vancouver. We studied a variety of different housing price points and came up with our conclusions.
But you didn't, in fact, tell council that there were 30 coach houses to analyze, but none had been sold. So you really didn't have a good idea what North Vancouver would do, did you?
Well, I have an opinion, and that is what I offered. And my opinion is that the underlying land value will not be impacted with this development form, particularly in North Vancouver, where the density is not being increased to allow for this built form.
So Kerry, do you have another question on this? Yep, great.
Mr. Penway. The homes, and I'll pick two on my streets on 15th in the 700 block, two brand new, very large homes going in with fully below ground basements. Is the square footage in those fully below ground basements factored into the FSR of the home structure?
So as I mentioned to an earlier question, so in the single-family zones, you're allowed to have a certain size of above-grade space, and then we exclude spaces called cellars. And we exclude those cellars if they're 5 or more feet below grade, so they've got to be quite deep into the ground. And you also have to achieve an energy standard above the building code to get that exclusion.
So if I was to build a new home, as they are doing down the street, and move my 1,500 square feet of basement that is half above ground and half below, and now fully depress it in the new construction, I could in fact free up FSR space to build that coach house and really have a much larger house and achieve the increased FSR without having it counted, correct?
So it's just a question of whether you're renovating a house, and changing the grade of the place by doing a new foundation. In 30 years with the city, I've never seen anybody do that. But in theory, if you, basically the exclusion area of the cellar is that if it's deep enough into the ground that it doesn't really impact the mass of the building that you see, that's when it qualifies for the exclusion. And that's where you get the cellar exclusion. So if I think what you're saying is, if you've got a house that's say 1 foot below average grade, and you push it into the ground so it's 5 feet below average grade, then it would qualify for an exclusion.
So if somebody, a developer, comes along and buys my home, knocks it down, builds a new home with a fully below ground basement, and virtually the same size home on the main floor, now ground floor, and builds a coach house, they can put a secondary suite in that basement. They can live on the main floor, and they can have a coach house, and they can effectively acquire much larger FSR, but really not have it counted.
Great, thank you, Gary. And I'll get Gary to wrap that question up, and then we're at time.
This
so.
diagram kind of is what really shows that, right? And so basically, if you're going to do a coach house, your house has to be smaller. So you take up to 1,000 square feet out of the size of your house. That's not the cellar space. That's you take out of the upper floor. You have to take that out of your house and put it to the back. And so you wind up with a smaller house. And that's where we're virtually not seeing developers come in to do exactly what you're saying. 80% of what we're seeing are people retaining their existing house. 93% of people who are doing these are people who are building them for themselves, not a developer or builder-based kind of market.
Great, thank you.